from Canberra. So, firstly, the numbers. We now have 28,504 total cases in Australia since the beginning of the pandemic. That means 21 newly confirmed cases in the last 24 hours. Very pleasingly, we know that there are outbreaks both in Sydney and in Melbourne, but very few cases were diagnosed up till the cut-off for today's numbers last night. So, in fact, 0 cases for the 24 hours to 8 p.m. in New South Wales yesterday, and only 3 cases in Victoria. So that is really just an incredibly important message that whilst we are concerned with these locally acquired cases, of course we are, the contact tracing exercise, the testing and the isolation efforts that are being done in both Victoria and New South Wales are bearing fruit. Of course, there have been other elements of what we call our suppression strategy that have been put into play over the last 24 hours and before that in relation to both of those states, which are also contributing to the control of the coronavirus in those places. Just to think about other elements of this, so we have now a number of active cases as well in hotel quarantine. Those numbers in people coming from overseas are starting to increase slowly. There's still a small proportion of the people that are coming across our border, but that hotel quarantine component of our control strategy remains crucial and important, and that 14 days is absolutely required and is happening in the states which are taking arrivals from overseas right now. In terms of hospitalisations, we only have 26 people in hospital right throughout Australia. That's hugely different from almost every other country in the world right now, where we are seeing major problems and issues in relation to hospitalisations, particularly in the US, but in many other countries. We have 0 people in intensive care and no one, of course, therefore on ventilation. So that is, again, a major difference between us and the rest of the world. There's been a lot of discussion, as there should be, around the vaccination policy and strategy here in Australia compared with other countries. I just want to reassure, as we've been saying for some time now, that we are going through the processes, as we've talked about for some time, in relation to getting vaccination to Australians, and that is on target. And we are going through all of the processes that need to be done to ensure safety, as well as a strong and efficient implementation of that strategy. So the next steps, as we're going through, in fact, I met with our newly formed division for vaccination, COVID vaccination here in the Department of Health in Canberra today. They have been working virtually non-stop all the way through from before Christmas and through Christmas and New Year's period, and now back on deck totally today and focused on what needs to be done in relation to that. Similarly, our independent regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, has continued to have very close and frequent contact with overseas regulators, some of whom have now given an emergency use authority for a couple of the vaccines, and another one overnight in India. So we have the finger on the pulse there. We know, firstly, what's happening in the regulatory space, but also, as importantly, what's happening in terms of implementation of those vaccine strategies in like-minded countries like the UK, like the US, and other parts of Europe. So that's going ahead. The approvals will happen when all of the information that we need to make those approvals is available, and that will be fast-tracked as much as possible, but no shortcuts will be made. The safety tick has to be there before anyone gets this vaccine in Australia. Once that approval is done, there will be deliveries from our overseas suppliers, and then from our local suppliers here in Australia, the AstraZeneca vaccine, if and when that gets the approval. And so after those supplies are in Australia, there will be extra testing that's done in terms of the absolute final tick for safety, and that takes a short period. And then we'll be starting. So we've said all along that by the end of March we will have vaccines here in Australia. If it ends up being some of those things being a bit earlier, well, that's great, but we're not going to promise any sort of anything there. We need to get through all of those processes that need to happen. Finally, I just want to make a reminder to those of you that are living in the Greater Sydney area, including Wollongong and the Central Coast. Masks are now mandated in indoor settings, so please take on that approach, as has happened in Victoria over many months, as part of, but not the only, but part of our protection against this virus spreading, to protect yourself, to protect your family, and to protect the wider community. So masks is part of that message in those areas where there is community transmission, but all those other messages we've been using since the beginning about washing your hands, coughing and or sneezing safely, keeping your distance of 1.5 metres, minimising, all of those things will help right now, particularly in those areas where there may be circulating virus. And of course, if you are sick, please do not go to work. Please do not go outside your house. Get tested, and that is a way we will firstly find where there is spread, if there is further spread in those areas, and again, protect you and your family and the wider community. Those testing rates do need to come up in Sydney and in Melbourne, and I know that both the New South Wales Health and Victorian DHHS are working to increase and improve those testing sites and availability. From the Commonwealth perspective, we've also increased our hours and support through our GP respiratory clinics. There's 149 of those all around the country. For those states that require it, we've increased the ability for asymptomatic testing in those sites, and so the Commonwealth is assisting. We had another AHPPC meeting today. We're meeting daily, and all of the Chief Health Officers and other experts on that committee are providing their insights and assistance particularly to New South Wales and to Victoria at this time. Happy to take questions.
Professor Kelly, it's been a confusing weekend on borders. Is it concerning to you that the Commonwealth definition of a hotspot seems to be chucked out the window, and were the borders discussed at the APAC meeting today?
So the borders were discussed. I did want to find out if there were going to be any changes there so that we can discuss those. But look, ultimately the domestic border closures are a matter for the states, and they're doing what they feel is necessary to protect their own populations within their own states, and so that's that. We do have a hotspot definition from the Commonwealth that was mostly designed and was agreed actually at AHPPC and at National Cabinet to guide Commonwealth support to state public health responses, for example, in relation to aged care and so forth. So that's there for that reason. I am very happy to see how the NT, Tasmania, and some of the other states are using their own sort of version of a hotspot definition in relation to their border decisions. But the other states, as I say, they have to make the decisions as they see fit to protect their own population.
Given how quickly situations can change, do you believe that we should be, going on these great summer holidays before the vaccine comes into wide circulation, given how quickly it can be all taken away from us?
So we always knew that from the beginning of this that a respiratory virus does generally spread with people, and so where people are more mobile and gathering together, then that is the way that viruses spread. So we know that's a typical way that things happen during summer in Australia, Christmas gatherings and so forth, as is playing out in the Victorian outbreak related to that Blackrock restaurant. Most of the secondary cases have been in Christmas gatherings, people coming together in their own homes, and so that's why we and also the Victorian and the New South Wales health authorities in particular have been making those pleas about gatherings in private homes as well as other venues, and indeed making adjustments to the public health orders in relation to that. So It's a risk. We do need to start learning at some point to live with this virus, but the vaccine's coming, and I think people being very cautionary and precautionary today and into the coming months whilst we're waiting for that vaccine is definitely the way to go.
Are we likely to get a fresh wave of cases once people start returning to their homes after this holiday period?
So we know where the hotspots are in Sydney and this one particular venue in particular in Melbourne. And so as people move around, yes, that is an issue, and that's why I'm sure the Victorian authorities have requested anyone coming from New South Wales should get a test. And the same for Victorians going into different into other jurisdictions. And so again, I call out to anyone who has been at those places of interest in either New South Wales or Victoria, and they are updated very regularly and with great detail and pinpointing times as well as place on the websites of those two authorities. And I would really request anyone who's been in New South Wales in the last couple of weeks to be checking that regularly, and similarly for those of you in Victoria. I'll just go to the phone. I think Paul from the AAP's on the phone.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. If the TGA does approve a vaccine or the 3 vaccines in January, why is it that it can't roll them out until late March? How can you explain that to the public, that long tail?
So I can absolutely assure the public there will be no delays once that approval is done, and that's the rate limiting step in a sense, is that that approval has to be done. After the approval, there needs to be stock available to be distributed, and then some of that stock needs to have further testing from the TGA after that approval. So there is some times there. It will be explained later on in the week. We'll be making more announcements about that timing and that process. But we're just being cautious in terms of the late March timeline at this stage, hoping that it may be shorter than that. But at this stage, we're being upfront that is our plan for the end of March to be our time when we started. But just to absolutely assure you and the Australian public, there will be no delays other than those that are absolutely necessary for safety and to ensure that the implementation of the vaccine strategy is working to its most efficient way to get vaccines to all Australians that want one by the end of the year.
Okay.